perhaps working to become a connoisseur or are moving in that direction with that artist. You look for more than one piece, you are collecting, you want to have 5 paintings by that artist or a few pieces of furniture by the same craftsman, or if like you are collecting, and I think that has changed.
I'm Andrew Russeth, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast by Artnet News. What is a connoisseur? Who can be one? What role do they play in shaping taste, the art market, and art history? There's perhaps no better place to ask these kind of questions than TEFAF, the many splendored Dutch fair of art, antiquities, and antiques that stages a New York edition each spring at the Park Avenue Armory. Last week, amid those festivities as dealers sold every kind of treasure, from ancient Roman sculptures to contemporary Korean dansequoit paintings, I had the pleasure of speaking with 3 experts about the state of connoisseurship and how a new generation of collectors is approaching that field.
So I'll dive into it. The panel is called The Next Generation of Connoisseurs, Creating New Legacies for Collections. And I'm thrilled to be joined at my left by 3 people I've really admired for a long time who know just a ton about this, about the field of collecting, about connoisseurship. I'll introduce them, then do a quick intro, and we're going to jump into it. To my left is Eleanor Carey. She is an art advisor with the Carey Art Group, and for over 15 years, she's given specialized advice to a diverse group of dedicated collectors all over the world. She's an arbiter of taste and an authority on the art market, and widely respected as an advisor and collector. I would add to that, she has supported just an innumerable group of artists of my generation, younger and older, artists, dealers, remarkable people who are making art today have gotten vital support from Eleanor. To her left is Ebony L. Haynes. She's a senior director at David Zwirner, of course, the international enterprise, and she is also director of the 52 Walker Space down in Tribeca, where there's an Arthur Jaffa show up now. And next month, we'll be showing Diamond Stingley, one of the most amazing, interesting young artists working today. She's a writer and curator from Toronto. She's based in New York, and she's the co-curator of the 2024 Triennial at MoCA Toronto. She sits on the boards of Artist Space in New York and the New Art Dealers Alliance. She also runs Black Art Sessions, an online school that offers free professional practice classes to Black students worldwide. To Ebony's left, last but not least, is Adam Charlap Hyman, who's the co-founder of Charlap Hyman Herrero, which is an architecture and design practice out of New York and Los Angeles. He's worked on residential interiors, freestanding buildings, stores and exhibition designs, and as Simone mentioned, in the map, you can find some artworks that he has highlighted across the fair, so let him be your tour guide. His work has been featured in all sorts of publications, but most recently on the covers of Elle Decor and Architectural Digest. To dive into it, really quick introduction. As Simone mentioned, we're talking about the current state of connoisseurship, which I think for many people, I've mentioned this to people, we're doing this, and some people roll their eyes, they scratch their head. It does feel like an old word in some ways, but I think has a real vital importance today. The word connoisseur comes to us about 300 years ago, early 1700s, from an obsolete French word meaning to know, which I think is sort of funny. There's a little bit of an irony in that connoisseurship, it is knowing, but it also comes with it a measure of taste. There's a measure of subjectiveness to it. In 1920s Europe, Bernard Berenson was trying to convince people, I'm bringing up Berenson because I think of him, of course, as like the connoisseur, right? The gentleman wandering through old picture galleries trying to discern quality. And he wrote of his Titian recommendation, "My proofs, they are in my own head and cannot easily go into words, for they come from that sixth sense, the result of 50 years' experience whose promptings are incommunicable." So there's a very old school sense of connoisseurship. Today, of course, I think that word is very contested. There was a quote from Lawrence Cantor, the chief curator at the Yale Art Gallery, speaking to the New York Times about 10 years ago, who called the word connoisseur an elitist, dirty word, artificial, subjective, and mostly imaginary. And yet, today, as we wander around TEFAF and we see just this incredible variety of art out there, from antiquities to bracingly new contemporary art, as we think about our canons being expanded to incorporate all sorts of histories that would have been neglected previously. We really need connoisseurs, I think. We need guides who understand quality, who have that expertise, but also that judgment. And so I'm excited to see where we delve into here. The first question I would throw out to the group is how they think about the word connoisseur and what it means for their practice today.
Well,
sorry.
Well, I think we're all, I'll jump in, but I think
Okay.
we're all hesitating because, well, I'll start by speaking for myself, is I have not thought of that word until this panel. I didn't roll my eyes. I just thought it was an interesting topic to propose. I haven't thought about what a connoisseur is in relationship to my practice, at least by the etymology of the word, where it comes from and what it was intended to encapsulate. I feel like it's antiquated enough that maybe it doesn't apply in how I view or how I interact with people who are interested in fine art or looking at the same things I am. I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur. And maybe that's an interesting reflection. If I'm not a connoisseur of something that I am crafting and practicing every day for over a decade, then who would I deem a connoisseur?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I personally would think of you as a connoisseur,
so would
someone who's really in the trenches. I think all three people on the stage. But I mean, Eleanor or Ebony, are there collectors you think of as connoisseurs today? Are there?
I definitely think about that word probably more than you do. I do think it has something to do with collections in a different way maybe than it does apply to a program at a gallery. And I do think it has something to do with cultivating this knowledge and reading and trying to, like you said, to be in the know. Yeah, there are a lot of collectors I think of as connoisseurs for sure.
And what defines them? What are the aspects of what they do?
The process of collecting doesn't come spontaneously. It's a very thought out, strategic endeavor for them. And I think you do see it more in the older generation. And we talk a lot in my office about like, is connoisseurship dead? I don't think it is. That would be my answer after kind of thinking about it for a long time. You see these people who, scour the auctions and are looking for this very specific thing, and, they know exactly what they're looking for, and they don't compromise until they find that one. It's a slow process, I think.
Yes.
I admire it, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're homing in on, there's great questions that we could lead on from there to unpack, but yeah, it's this idea of slowness, I think this kind of discernment, and its quality apart from maybe monetary value, it sounds like. I'm thinking like scouring the auctions. I think of like dealers, advisors that just, love like trawling through the regional auction houses, and they have alerts set. Adam, for you, you're coming at this often from designing spaces, creating places for people to live in. So you're looking at not just art, furniture, and so forth. Where does connoisseurship fall for you? What does it mean for you?
I guess I think of it, and not in the most perfectly sort of historically correct term, but in a more broad sense as someone's eye. And this is really the wrong way to think about connoisseurship in a historical sense, but I think of a connoisseur, at least, as somebody that is able to blend historical knowledge, a lot of time spent studying, an understanding of context, an understanding of the subjectivity of their point of view, and an embrace and a confidence in that point of view. And this is my personal definition of it, but I feel that I'm oftentimes working for people that bring that spark or that spirit to our conversations around what they want to live with. And it can be extremely enriching for me because they can teach me things and show me certain pathways to understanding, or maybe certain pathways to having a literacy around a certain subject matter that can mean that I can see that subject matter, more clearly. I can read it, I can understand it. So I think of it as that kind of deep understanding of something. And it can open your eyes, you can see something that you wouldn't have seen before when a connoisseur can show it to you in the right way.
You don't have to use a name, but could you give an example of what that's looked like for you? Have you learned from a kind of client about a specific field?
Yes, a very early project. It was not a complete project, really. I was coming in as somebody kind of to help this person They were much older than I was, and they had really made an amazing house and an amazing collection of art and furniture, but there were missing pieces and their taste had evolved, and so certain things that they had bought in the 80s they didn't love so much anymore, etc. And anyways, I helped them to kind of find a few pieces that we could sort of insert into what was already there. And I mean, this is like a very classic example of a type of connoisseur, but they were really obsessed with French Art Deco. And it took me down a whole path that I only understood in a very cursory way. And I began to learn about the marks of certain makers and the particular hand that certain people had graced these objects with. And I began to learn about different collectors and the sort of provenances of these things, and sort of to construct a whole understanding of why this thing was interesting. Something that I would have liked, and I would have maybe thought, oh, that's very beautiful, something is going on there, there's some sort of aura to it, it is obviously something special. But then once I knew all about it, it totally melted by the knowledge, because it just made it so much richer. It was like I could see it all of a sudden. You know, something that was blurry and interesting but blurry became clear. That was like a big learning moment.
You know, can I just share a reflection? Because I haven't thought about this word until preparing or thinking about the context for this talk. And perhaps the oddness of the word for some is that the things that define what a connoisseur is, I completely can relate to, but the context of this connoisseur with fine art is particularly about, there's a class level to it and there's money involved, because somebody could be as knowledgeable about anime or sneakers or a particular music genre and may not be or recognize the word connoisseurship. It's really associated, or I think used and applied with somebody who wants to, you know, use the word confidence, which I thought was an interesting descriptor for it too, like maybe a confident person, maybe dangerously confident, coupled with an ego, which can be good and bad, but I mean, there's a bit of projection and display, I think, with connoisseurship. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I mean, I think that's where maybe some of us have more experience thinking about it than others.
No, I think that's such a fascinating point. And this New York Times article I was alluding to earlier talked along the lines of what you were saying. Was in the broader culture, it seems like there has been a sort of embrace of connoisseurship. People who just know so much about anime. I mean, some artists I know who can go deep into these graphic novels, like beer, you know, chocolate, things that are somewhat approachable. And then at the same time, in the art world, there has been this sort of crisis around the word, or just lack of interest in it. And I mean, Eleanor, you were alluding to the sort of death of connoisseurship, and to put you on the spot, can you talk about that a little bit more, about what you think sort of driving that? And
I think it's a generational thing. I do think it requires time to become an expert on certain things, and people are just more rushed now. They don't go as deep into things. I think it's a very good point that both of you guys bring up about the confidence and about the class thing, because I do think we were saying even before we talked about the idea of the hype beast. They're connoisseurs. What they're collecting might not interest anyone on this stage, but there's a very large cohort of people who are interested in learning everything they can about sports memorabilia or sneakers or toys. There's a huge, I think,
like other kinds of collectors.
Other kinds of collectors. Millennials,
yeah.
I think, are collecting things in a lot of ways. But when I talk about the death of connoisseurship, I think it's that slow pace and the hunt.
yeah,
And this expert, I think the pace has changed. So that's why we ask, is it dead? It's
Yeah.
there, it's just different.
yeah,
There's also a difference in the collector, you kind of mentioned too, right? Like the newer generation, if you are truly a collector of something, it is more than one. Traditionally, or I think how I came into it earlier, if you collect an artist, you are perhaps working to become a connoisseur or are moving in that direction with that artist. You look for more than one piece, you are collecting, you want to have 5 paintings by that artist or a few pieces of furniture by the same craftsman, or if like you are collecting. And I think that has changed just in my short 12-something years. I shared an artwork with a client thinking it was of their taste, and they said, I love that artist, but I don't collect them. So there was no benefit for him to buy one, even though it was a strong work. But that feels rare.
That's interesting.
That's really interesting.
That's kind of thoughtful in a way.
Like, what is a true collector? It's not just someone who comes and maybe buys one.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a conversation I was having with an art advisor at Frieze who was saying something that's really hurt the collecting field. This person was saying is that art's obviously gotten very expensive. Access to great work has gotten very expensive. And so this model you're talking about, I always think about someone like Roy Neuberger, who bought, 80 Milton Averys or something, was obsessed, knew it inside and out. You sort of, for many artists, just can't do that nowadays.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think it's price prohibitive in a lot of ways. It's really hard to go in depth on things because the prices go up so quickly. And it's hard to support an artist over even a decade,
Right. You can buy early on maybe a few pictures and then you get priced out.
But you can look at historical art that you still can do it with.
That's why I feel like it's an older thing, yeah.
There's less of it maybe than there was in Barrington's time, certainly, to buy. But I think that there is something that's definitely shifted in terms of people's kind of appetite for this sort of repetitive consumption, which makes what I think of as these kind of great collectors, these sort of mysterious people that hoard lots of one thing. And that may have to do with the kind of broader appreciation for the subjectivity of art history and kind of a less linear appreciation for how something becomes valuable and what that value can mean. I think the transparency around art markets and sort of how value is created is such that it doesn't quite match, I think, this extreme collector appetite the way maybe it might have in another time, another generation. I see exactly what you're saying with my clients that I work with, that they're not interested in having an early, a mid, a late, they aren't really actually. They're happy to see something in a museum and then to have something here and something else that has something interesting to do with that, but it's a more dispersed kind of network of thoughts.
By the way, I think the connoisseur is rare. I don't think every collector is a connoisseur. Maybe they don't even have to be, but there are these rare cases where I still think, it's a beautiful thing to see. I don't want to mention any names, but there are collectors who go so deep into a certain artist and you just know that you go visit them, you just see there's one in the city who was always collecting Tasumi Kudo, and just had all these great examples. And it's such a treat to be able to speak to him about the work and to see it there.
It's interesting, this is such a subjective meter of connoisseurship too, right? I mean, if somebody is a connoisseur of something, who is deeming that that is the correct art to be a connoisseur of? And this is really just a reflection, we know that there is this 1% of the 1% informing what is priced and on the walls and at auction.
It used to be the museums that would be
It used to be museums,
but
they're still in it.
No longer.
But
that's not the case.
I would hope that this conversation, as a disclaimer, wouldn't dissuade anyone from feeling that they couldn't be a connoisseur of something that is not in something like an art fair here. You know what I mean? There are connoisseurship of fine art, whose fine art. Basically what I'm saying is there's clearly a register of what we're saying a connoisseur is in this context. And very few people are able to be part of that conversation. And even fewer people are the ones who decide who can be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's just a super reduced individual.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, I wonder if maybe we can even just decide to blow it up a little bit, expand it. And I just feel to me, you don't even necessarily need to own to be a connoisseur. I'd like to believe.
I believe.
I think that's true, to have conversations
Curators.
with people, yeah.
Yes, if you know the history, if you just spend time in those musty galleries.
I'm gonna entertain the audience for a minute with a story of a time when I first met Andrew, and I was working at a small gallery on 27th Street, and I was very new. I had just come to New York. It was my first job at a gallery. I would also say I was completely new to the art world in general. I hadn't even stepped into an art gallery before. And New York art world specifically, and about, I'll just use this example, like painting specifically, is just really the world for connoisseurs. This is where they really know what they're talking about. And I think I have impostor syndrome forever because I could just never keep up with the conversation. I mean, people would come into the front desk, to your point, they would drop a note about an art historical reference to draw a connection to this painting they just saw and craft a dialogue and a narrative about this artist and the painting. I gave myself a bit of room because I didn't know who they were talking about, but I would write it down and try and figure it out and started, but then the list just got so long of what I had no reference for and didn't know, and then it just felt like, well, I'm never going to say I can fully have a grasp on abstract painting from these particular decades because maybe I'm not as interested in it as somebody else. But then is that okay that I'm not? And only now do I feel fully fine not caring. Like I know what I like and I know why. So maybe in that sense I'm a connoisseur and that I know exactly what I want to talk about and why. But there is a bit of a kind of, or maybe I felt in the time, and I think this is probably felt by others, that you are not in the connoisseurship club if you're not able to speak about something in a particular way or appreciate the route with which you should have come to that conclusion and use particular references that feel canonical and referent for the majority of people who have studied it. But it took a long time before I felt comfortable saying I don't know who you're talking about.
I still struggle with that.
Yeah.
I pretend a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
right?
you fake it all the time.
No, and yeah, I feel that way about abstract painting.
Everybody feels that. You're not the only person, and nobody
Oh,
can
good.
know everything. And I think connoisseurs do zone in on their thing and
But
become
that's that
experts
confidence
on their
thing, right?
Yeah.
They're so confident that they make you feel,
I like the embrace
oh,
and the
I'm
confidence,
never going
like
to know
you
this
said.
much.
Yeah.
I'll be like, why do I care about Pollock?
I don't either.
I mean,
by the way.
I appreciate the auction record, but I'm not, everyone in here should love it if they do, but I mean, it's okay if you don't.
But
Yeah, I agree.
there is a blinders thing. Like the connoisseurs that I'm thinking of that I know, they are like fixated on a very specific area of whatever it is. And sometimes it's really annoying, like you're saying. Sometimes it's like so amazing because they're such a nut for this weird thing, this one particular painter that no one's ever heard of, and they have everything, or they are obsessed with this particular type of textile and you can't even do anything with it. It's like in drawers and they're just crazy for it and they know everything about it. It can be like so infectious and amazing. And you leave and you're like, oh my God, now I'm obsessed with this random, useless, scrap of fabric that I need to learn everything about. But this kind of blinders sort of for one specific thing, it's very unusual. I don't know if that was more common in like other times, but I do feel that now there's just so much information available. Like if you want to be a connoisseur about something, it's like never been easier to go out and find out everything you want about something.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and maybe it's circling back to what Eleanor, you were saying. I mean, I always think about being in college or even high school, sort of like early internet days, and being into like, noise music or something, and you'd like trawl the internet and you'd be like, oh, the Japanese release has 2 more minutes, and you'd get so deep in these things. And now it's sort of like, it's all there on YouTube. I sort of know it's there. My tastes have changed, of course, but I wonder, there are reasons to be...
I think taste is a big part of it,
taste,
like you said,
yeah.
which I think it's all out there and you can become an expert. You can know things, but I don't know if that means that you have the eye or it's really hard to explain what this is, but when you see it, you know. It's style and taste, and it's a certain kind of expert in this thing that you're an expert in. And that's why I do think it's not necessarily like about noise music or anime. I do think of the word connoisseur more in terms of collecting than I do. We were saying anyone can be a connoisseur, it's true, but because that's just the way we've seen it. A curator at a museum can do it too because they're building a collection, and it's a different way. But
it's about bringing something to the fore also, maybe, that's undervalued, so less of just an obsessive... I mean, I think about someone like Mitchell Elgas, who like, you go into that gallery, you just know he's trawled through like the darkest corners of archives and auction houses, and you're like, what is this thing? This is a former artist and dealer on the Lower East Side. Oftentimes I find what he shows like kind of appalling, and like I'm not into it at all, but I know this is someone who it's his eye. And so maybe that's something that's changed too. We've gone through a very like unipolar model of Berenson, right? Is this a Titian? Is this not a Titian? Should you buy it for 100,000 or whatever? To this more individualized thing. Maybe that's a democratizing aspect, positive aspect.
I hope so.
I think that's the more exciting place, like, evolution of it, really. And it's great for that kind of dissonance for us to talk about things, right? Like, uniformly, should we be agreeing that Titian is this rigid thing versus this person? I mean, I'll use a curator as an example, but there's no, well, I have never seen, nor do I feel aligned with a constant or uniform curatorial style, right? Like, there would be, in terms of taste, or what I see as tasteful, or what I feel is a successful exhibition design. There's another curator who could do a show with the same artist, and I think it's horrendous. Mm-hmm. And then there's a connoisseurship there. Like, you need to kind of study who you would want to work with, and do you like their style? You're kind of picking lanes.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot
That's
of those
interesting.
decisions to be made.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ebony, even to put you on the spot, I mean, you curated the recent Raymond Saunders show at Zorner and Andrew Krebs. Approaching that, did you kind of, I would argue, was a role of connoisseurship probably in putting that together. I mean, how did you think about your role in that in terms of defining quality and...
Beautiful shows.
Thank you. It's an interesting question to answer because I don't know that I have something super interesting to offer. Like, it feels like it's just like an instinct. I just follow my own taste.
Yeah, that's the word.
You know,
yeah.
I know what I like. I know what I hope people enjoy looking at. Of course, in this instance, it was the largest group of Saunders works ever exhibited in New York, so I felt a bit of pressure. I wanted to make sure it was a solid presentation that gave a great overview of the practice. But I mean, for a little insight, I was in storage units for days in Los Angeles. I saw over 150 things, narrowed it down to about 75, and then narrowed that down even more. So there is a process, but I mean, you saw my top picks, that's really it. It's like, that feels good there. No, I don't really like that.
Yeah. We keep kind of circling around to, there is this decline, but we also enjoy seeing the connoisseur when they arise. I wonder, this decline, Ebony, you've homed in on these class issues around it. I mean, it is great that we're no longer beholden to these things. Do we need connoisseurs? I mean, what role do they serve in this art industry, in this broader art decorative architectural world?
Yes, we need
Yeah.
that.
One dealer I talked to said, like, in 20 years, she's like, you think this word is crazy now? In 20 years, no one's going to use it.
Well, I just think maybe not, I was going to say not the word.
Right,
I think
but
we need these
yes,
people.
Right,
you
so
know?
yeah, maybe we should even just set aside
I mean, it's
the word.
great for artists to have people who are experts in their work.
Yes,
who
we
know how
need
to-
that.
Yeah, and who can present them in different ways and interesting ways. I mean, they're basically fans or nerds. I mean, there's
Yes.
other words you can use.
Yes.
But I see your problem with the word. I
And
see it. But
it's very exciting to meet somebody that's gone super deep into something that you're interested in. You know, like, you're on the outside, you're just interested in it, but they know, you know. But I don't necessarily conflate the connoisseur, this idea of the connoisseur, with maybe even knowing, like, what's a nice one or a not nice. It's more like this kind of, I guess I was thinking about it as I was thinking about this talk, is like someone's particular eye, their focus, their way of reading something, their way of understanding something, and being able to cut through, you know, a lot of distracting factors and understand something about that thing. And it is from looking and learning and studying this idea that there's like a mystical component to it. I don't know, unless the mystical component is just how could somebody be so fixated on one thing, but it's just this like weird, you know, amazing
Nerd.
nerd, you know, and it's
Beautiful nerd.
cool.
Yeah.
what's the
I feel
difference
like-
to you between a connoisseur and an expert? Because I think they're kind of different things in a way, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Can you tease that out? Yeah, that's interesting.
I do think that, again, it's about, like you said, it's a personal way of looking at it. The connoisseur brings something different to the table than just an expert, I think. Yeah, it's the way that they go about living with these things and amassing them and caring for them and presenting them over and over again. But I don't know, do you think a connoisseur and an expert are the same thing?
I think it's really tough. I see the overlap. There is this kind of negative quality to it. With the connoisseur, there is this element of like authority. There's this element of sort of pushing, which I actually, as a writer, identify with to some degree in a positive way, hopefully, which is like the role of the critic, the role of the journalist. Roberta Smith always says it's to like get people through the doors. It's to get people to go see this art you love, which I think hopefully the connoisseur does as well. But I really am coming around to like, oh God, just toss the work. It's distracting. It's the discernment, I guess I would come back to too. Like the nerd expert is just, whoa, they can tell you 4,000 facts about like Florian Stettheimer or me. But like the discerning connoisseur would say like, oh, well, like this is the best picture. This is the framework in which we can see it among 5 other artists. But I'm curious, for Ebony, you as an art dealer, Eleanor, you as an art advisor, do you feel the need to like, setting aside the word connoisseur, experts, are you trying to kind of create them? Do you try to like entice your clients to delve deep like that? Does it matter to you if they become that way about the art?
They might not need me if they become an expert.
Well, that's right. They need, yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think everybody has the capacity to care that much. I think when you find people that do care, it's really fun to help them get on their own road. It's not a priority for everybody.
Not everyone wants to be, yeah.
Some people just want some nice things to live with, and it's a different kind of obsession that not everybody has.
Yeah.
Maybe not everyone needs, you know. A lot of people, there's like a mainstream taste for a reason.
Yeah.
Because it's like most people like these things, and I feel a connoisseur is just a little bit to the side of that, you know.
Yeah, kind of poking or prodding.
Yeah, looking for things that are a little under the radar, less popular.
Yeah.
You know.
That makes sense, Eleanor. I feel very privileged to, I would say now the majority of the time, I show, curate, and then subsequently sell work that, in this instance, we're talking today, the last 3 years, I have commissioned. I am working with an artist, so I am deeply invested, which makes my enthusiasm, you know, it's shifted from 12 years ago when I felt the need to first study about an artist that I was told to sell or curate. So I think now I hope that anybody who's coming to the space or wants me to share work that I'm excited about, they're gonna feel my excitement. So if they're interested, for me as the nerd, I'm really excited. I'm like, oh great, you're gonna love it. So like, let me come, you gotta meet the artist. Like I wanna do all of that every single time. But I don't think I'd expect them, nor am I asking of them to go down this road with me, with this artist, indefinitely into perpetuity. Like I would hope they continue to follow. I would hope they become a true collector. But I'm really just excited about this moment of introducing or maybe reintroducing.
Totally. I think that might be the perfect kind of optimistic but clear-eyed note to end on. If you can join me in thanking Eleanor, Ebony, and Adam with a round of applause, and then we'll do questions. All right, thank you. Anyone?
A few of you briefly touched on the word like training the eye, and I studied art history decades ago, so training your eye, and I'm just curious, how did each of you, maybe like Eleanor and Adam, you have clients and you're involved with aesthetics and you're helping them build collections. Do you talk to your clients or do you find a way to educate them about their eye? And then Ebony, I know you're in a sales role, so your goal is kind of different, but been to your gallery, aesthetically beautiful. Oftentimes I need to learn a lot more about concepts and ideas which are not so visually easy. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on training the eye.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think usually my job is to figure out what might be interesting to someone. You know, like I have to find an access point in this person's life for what I'm going to show them, or the room I'm going to make for them, or the piece that I want them to consider. It's almost like my job is oftentimes to figure out where their eye would go, and then to put something in front of them that will catch it. And hopefully that thing is the best possible version of whatever they would naturally be drawn to. So in that way, I do think that I'm trying to really understand their eye sort of as it is pre-looking at amazing things, maybe. Like maybe they don't know about how what they like could turn into a chair, but I have to find the chair that they would like. So this is kind of my relationship to my clients. And then I do really try to show them context, and I work a lot with historical reference images of rooms, spaces, exhibitions, things that kind of can illustrate like the world that this thing is coming out of, because I definitely don't expect people to know all about it before we're looking at it. So I try to color the whole picture in a way that they can get excited.
I'm still training my eye all the time, and it's basically just seeing as much as you can, from museums to gallery shows to, being in other collectors' homes, traveling if you have the opportunity to do so, and it's a constant exercise. And so for me, yes, a big part of what an art advisor does is the education component. Clients don't do this every day. They come to us for the education. I love doing that, and training their eye is just getting them in front of as much as I can. And I think it's a huge part of it. I mean, the more you learn what you don't respond to, what you do respond to, you can't develop your taste without really being in front of things. And I do think, a lot of people are doing so much on their phone these days. And I really don't think you can train your eye that way. You have to be in front of things, and you have to go look. So yeah, I think training the eye all the time, forever.
Totally agree. I couldn't be confident about why there's certain things I don't like until I saw them multiple times in the real world next to other things.
So yeah, figuring out what you don't like is such a big part of it.
That was a great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
It's something that's sort of floating around this, and I was just curious about how the two of you think about the notion of value. Obviously, because we're at an art fair, but just in the larger sense. It's one of the reasons I do like the idea of connoisseurship, because it, at least as I define it, it implies that value can be like subjective and like highly personal. These occasions when there's like one collector who will value this one thing. But I think both of you guys have very different enterprises, and I'm curious how that idea of value, cultural, financial, comes into play.
I mean, I do agree. I think that there's all kinds of value. I mean, if you're talking about monetary value, or you're talking about the value, cultural value. And yeah, the fact that somebody is putting all their attention into this thing and collecting it and learning about it gives it value. I don't think it just has to have market value to have value. I mean, often the things I love most are not the things with the most market value. So, and I also think it brings value when you see people devoting so much time and care to something. It elevates its value. Could in the market as well, elevate it.
The context is probably the first thing that pops out to me for value. So just be candid, there are different levels at every point in the art world, including art fairs. There'll be very transparently a very different price point here than an art fair that, I'll name one that doesn't exist anymore to not call out an art fair, but one of my favorites, The Dependent, if anyone remembers.
That was a great event.
Marcus's art fair in the hotel. Mm-hmm. There are different models to provide the right context for different values, but then one might have a different cultural or subcultural value, while the other has a very clear and different market value. And I think that goes just as far as where you see the work. So what institutions have housed the work, in what context, and who has curated or written about it. I think all of those things really add to how I place value in it. But I think context is probably the highest point of value for me. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe if we give another round of applause for the panel.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It'll help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili and Carolyn Goldstein. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.